Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program this Memorial Day, sponsored by the Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project. We have an exceptional guest today, Miss Eurica Huggins-Axum. I'm Michelle Dingle, and I'm excited to be serving as your moderator today. This program will be closed captioned for your viewer audience experience. Miss Eurica Huggins-Axum is a co-founder and director of International Affairs for the African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute, also called ADACI. It is a cultural and educational nonprofit, community-based organization established in 1992 to institutionalize the remembrance of our African ancestors who perished during the journey called the Middle Passage and those who survived. In addition, she has led the development of several State Department and White House special initiatives for Africa and other world regions, and has facilitated and participated in many global educational and cultural exchanges, including the establishment of branches of ADACI in Senegal, Nigeria, Brazil, and Cameroon. As a cultural leader and activist, Ms. Huggins has addressed diverse topics related to Africa and the African diaspora. She has addressed women's empowerment as well as diversity and social justice issues as well. She is the recipient of several community service awards, and in 2019 received the Distinguished 400 Award from the 400 Years of African American History Congressional Commission. Today, on Memorial Day 2021, she will discuss the African tradition of honoring ancestors, as well as the practical ways that we in the diaspora can create sacred spaces and commemorate their lives. Please join me in welcoming Miss Eurica Huggins.
Thank you so much for such a lovely introduction.
You're welcome.
You make me look so good.
Well deserved, for sure.
I truly appreciate it. And I also want to thank my dear sister Ann Chin for her amazing work. We so appreciate everything that she is doing to honor the ancestors in such a special way. And a shout out also to your fantastic team of colleagues. So just a little bit of thanks again for the introduction to Adasi. As you mentioned, we are a nonprofit education, cultural, and spiritual organization. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we are dedicated to institutionalizing the remembrance of our ancestors who perished in the Middle Passage, or the Ma'afa, as it is often known. We commemorate the millions of African ancestors, the men, women, children, who perished, who were kidnapped, trafficked, and shipped from the hinterlands of Africa to the Americas. And we also commemorate those who survived the Ma'afa because we stand on their shoulders. We draw upon their strength, their courage, their wisdom, and their determination that we carry in our DNA. Adasi, the significance of our work is really around the healing and the restoration from the trauma of the Ma'afa, in order to break the collective amnesia, to restore the dignity of those nameless, faceless ancestors, those men, women, and children who perished in the Ma'afa, and also to address the pain and the shame, the fear and the guilt that we still carry in our DNA that is passed on from generation to generation. As I mentioned, we also honor those ancestors who survived the Ma'afa. And then we also celebrate the collective fortitude that has sustained African descendants throughout this massive loss. We were very fortunate in Adasi to have Dr. John Henry Clark, who served as Adasi's senior advisor from the inception until he transitioned to the ancestors. He is the master of master historians, very well known, Dr. John Henry Clark. and also Babaka Joseph Njai, who was the curator of the slave house on Goree Island. We were fortunate to have him serve as a senior advisor to our Adasi Senegal group. We have international sites in Senegal, Nigeria, Cameroon, as well as in Brazil. Now, the thing about Adasi is we commemorate the ancestors, or we remember them in a very progressive way through our programs and activities that feature world-renowned scholars, artists, activists, faith-based leaders, filmmakers, youth advocates, and many more. Adasi serves as sort of like a connecting or reconnecting instrument to our past, our present, and to our future. And when we think of history, history is not just a bunch of names, faces, and places. History really tells us who we are, where our economic power lies, who took it, how they took it, and how we can gain it back. So within that context, Adasi educational forums allow us to really examine the implications of the enslavement, of the slave trade, its aftermath, and the effects that it has on people of African descent in particular. So we've featured not only Dr. John Henry Clark, Joseph Harris, Sterling Stockey, Lisa Aubrey, Professor Ackland Lynch, Dr. Kevin Washington, who was a past president of the National Association of Black Psychologists. And so we also talk about the psychological impact of enslavement. When you think about, slavery represented a very short period in our history because it brought about the dispersion of Africans throughout the diaspora. But our history is thousands of years old. I mean, we gave the world its first humanity and great civilizations. So when we see our ancestors on those slave ships and how they were stripped of their dignity, they were stripped of their culture, they were stripped of everything, but they could not be stripped of their spirituality, which we still carry. We understand that that is not the full context of who we are. If we look just as recent as the 15th century, we look at the great civilizations, the kingdoms of Mali, Benin, Songhai. We look at the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, where upwards of 20,000 students would be studying at that university. Europeans came and studied at the feet of African scholars. Africans came from all over the African continent to study. They studied astronomy, religion, science, law, literature, and many more. So we are also the descendants of those who created those great kingdoms and who ran those civilizations, and who are also the scholars, the thinkers, the strategists, and the leaders of those societies. The way we engage young people, one of the ways I should say, is through some of our film discussions, such as The Footprints of Pan-Africanism, which was a well-known film by Shirikiana Garima, the wife of the other filmmaker, Haile Garima, very well known for his film Sankofa. And so what it does is it looks at youth Pan-Africanism in the 21st century. And so it allows our young people to look at the trans-border issues that impact them across the globe. Black Lives Matter in the US is also Black Lives Matter in the Afro-Brazilian community, in London, in other parts of the world. So it allows them to engage in these discussions, and it allows them to get away from these cell phones and to be able to think and strategize beyond just being able to go into Google. Google is great, but we want our young people to think about that.
Okay, so tell me this. Why is it commemorating our ancestors so important?
Well, commemorating our ancestors is very important because not only do we stand on their shoulders, but if you think of traditional African society, venerating the ancestors is an integral part of traditional African life. We don't see when someone transitions to the spirit world, they're in the spirit world, but they're still amongst us. They're still part of us. So it's a transition into a different way of life. So African traditional society understood that. And so we honor the ancestors because of the things that they have done, the good deeds that they have done, but we also honor them and we remember them because we recognize that they're still a part of our existence. And one of the ways that we also remember them and honor them is by pouring libations and calling on the ancestors. It is a way of reaching out. It is a way of offering some water, or sometimes pouring libations is also done with alcohol, but it is a way of inviting them to come and be a part of the celebration or the ceremony. But it's also acknowledging their good deeds. It is also acknowledging the impact that they still can have on our lives. So the ancestor veneration is very important in traditional African society, but we also see it in many other traditions as well. In Chinese, if you go into a Thai restaurant and you look up, you'll see they have a little altar and they are honoring their ancestor with a picture, with candles, you name it. In India, they also commemorate their ancestors. So it's an ancient tradition, but certainly is still very much alive with us.
Okay, and what kind of tools do you have for commemorating?
So one of the ways that a very important part of Adasi over the years, over the last 20 years or so, is the creation of these sacred spaces or our memorials to the ancestors. And it is a way that allows us to reconnect. It's a sacred space, and altars have been well known in many traditions. Certainly in the Black church, going down to the altar is something of tradition, right? So these Adasi altars are our sacred spaces, and it allows us to connect, to contemplate, to connect with the divinity within us, to meditate, to honor the ancestors, to recognize them within a memorial space. We know that slavery brought about that trauma, and that trauma really disconnected us from our genetics, our DNA. And so by having these sacred spaces, it not only allows us to heal, but it allows us to reconnect with the divinity. It allows us to reconnect with the ancestors. And we do have a short video that tells a little bit about the Adasi altars.
A central part of Adasi's tradition has been the creation of ancestral commemorative altars, which are artistically created, but they are sacred spaces and they serve as memorials to our ancestors. These sacred memorials present a more cultural, spiritual, and contemplative environment by which we can access the power of our ancestors. As you look at these pictures of the various altars, please note that they have been created for various reasons, for various organizations, and for various ancestors, some living and some departed. The altar and the altar building is an ancient African tradition. That's part of a way of venerating our ancestors. And through the construction of an altar, which is simply a physical area in our environment serving as a focal point where we can express our feelings and our emotions within a sacred space. It's a place where we let the ancestors and the world know how much we value our connection to our ancestors, to spirit, to the divine. In the most ordinary sense, an altar is a place where an assortment of special objects is arranged, and we arrange them for purposes of focusing our spiritual energy.
Those were quite elaborate and actually very beautiful. So that was amazing to see. I do know that there is an annual commemoration that's taking place in June. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Definitely. So the annual commemoration allows us to spiritually reunite with Africans in the diaspora and on the continent, particularly in the Adasi sites, to commemorate and to remember our ancestors who perished in the Ma'afa and those who survived. And our annual commemoration takes place in June. We do this in conjunction with the International Coalition to Commemorate the African Ancestors of the Middle Passage, which is ICAM. It's a coalition that was founded in about 5 years ago, sorry. And these are organizations and individuals who, like Adasi, have been commemorating the ancestors for decades. And so we decided to come together and declare the second weekend in June as International Commemoration Weekend, where we can commemorate the ancestors of the Ma'afa, where we can call on individuals to take a minute of silence to remember the ancestors. We can call on the spiritual and religious organizations, the Black Church, to dedicate a service to the ancestors. So by remembering, we begin that healing process. So for Adasi, our commemoration takes place in Washington, D.C., the main headquarters. And it's a spiritual healing ceremony. It's a celebration. It's also an educational forum. But I think we have a clip that gives you just a small glimpse as to what the Adasi commemoration, international annual commemoration taking place in June.
Adasi was founded 24 years ago in order to institutionalize the remembrance of our African ancestors who perished during the Middle Passage, or the Ma'afa.
We had an opening libation at Union Temple Church, and following that, we made the walk down to the water.
We are here on the 11th Street Bridge. It was a bridge that's also represented the pathway, the crossover from slavery into emancipation. The ritual that you saw with the stones, it's a symbol of our connectedness to the ancestors. Each person had 2 stones, one that they took, and we asked for the cleansing of the individual, the aura of that individual, and we asked them to send it, throw it into the water, into the ocean, and we ask everyone to take a stone with them so that they can remember the ancestors when they go back home. I am here today to remember the ancestors of the Ma'afa under the 11th Street Bridge with WHUT.
So Adasi's is in June, but we know that we can commemorate ancestors at any time throughout the year, correct?
Yes.
So how can someone commemorate our ancestors? Like, what are some of the things that people can do to commemorate our ancestors?
That's an excellent question. So if you're not able to participate in any of the commemoration activities taking place the second weekend in June, which this year will be June 12th and 13th, we ask that you, first of all, just take a minute at any point in time and just close your eyes and remember those who perished in the Ma'afa and those who survived. Because by remembering, we begin to reconnect with the source of who we are, and we begin that healing process. So we have very practical things that people can do. You can plant a tree as your own memorial to your ancestors. You can paint a picture as your memorial to the ancestors. You can look at consciousness-raising films like Sankofa or 400 Years Later, Footprints of Pan-Africanism, and begin to have discussions, gather with your family and friends. You can also, there are many other ways that you can do this. You can also engage young people by having them sit and talk with their elders and begin to document the history of the family. You can have them begin to gather young people in their community and begin discussions about where African people still are in the diaspora. What are those cultures and how did they get there? We also have a guide on how to commemorate the ancestors, and this is on our website, www.adasiancestors.org. And it gives you a lot of very practical ways. But I think one of the most practical things and most honorable things that we can do is by having good character. We honor the ancestors by having integrity, by remembering who we are, remembering our history, by raising our young people to respect the elders, to watch out for the elders and watch out for themselves, by having the young people understand the term Ubuntu, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am, that they are part of a greater community And each person in that community understands his or her role in contributing to the betterment of that community. So we commemorate them in really special ways, but in particular by having good character, remembering ourselves, having our pride and dignity in who we are, and other practical things which are outlined. Write poems, write songs that commemorates them. The main thing is that we remember who we are and we remember our connectedness to each other and to the ancestors.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Huggins. This is awesome. Any final thoughts before we kind of wrap this up?
I would say that, as we go through everything that we've been going through for the past year or so, I would say definitely draw upon the courage, the wisdom, determination of our ancestors. Know that we come from greatness and richness. Know how much we have given to the world, and we have also received from the world, but understanding who we are, and keep yourself grounded and reach back to the ancestors and to the divinity within us. I think that is the best that we can do, because when we raise ourselves, we raise humanity as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here.
No problem. Do you
share.
want to throw out the email address just one more time for people?
Sure. The Adasi website is www.adaci ancestors, ancestors.org.
Okay,
And
perfect.
that way you can get a lot about Adasi. You'll also get a link to the ICAMP website and all of the various things that we do in the community.
Great. Okay, thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you have any questions or comments regarding this Memorial Day conversation, please send us an email to middlepassagemarkers@gmail.com and someone will respond. Thank you to all of our supporters, to the board, and to Nick Huster, our creative consultant, for putting this program together. For those who would like to donate, you can go through PayPal or Network for Good. The links to both are on our website, middlepassageproject.org. Or you can mail your donation to Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project, P.O. Box 3071. That's in Jacksonville, Florida, 32206. And for those who just like to shop like me, you can also donate through the Amazon Smile Foundation. Amazon Smile is a program that donates a percentage of your Amazon purchases to a charity of your choice. So just go to amazon.smile.com, link up Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project as your charity, and go ahead and start shopping. Thank you again, Ms. Huggins, and everyone, please have a great day.
Thank you.